Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Today we're reacting to this Islamophobe who apparently shredded Islam during a hate speech at a conference. She sounds very confident, very convincing. Her name is Brigitte Gabriel. She's the founder of Act for America. So let's hear what she has to say.
When Prophet Muhammad supposedly revealed his revelation from the angel Gabriel that he is supposed to be the last of the prophets in the early 600s, he started preaching in his own city, Mecca. He tried to recruit friends and followers to be able to spread his religion. And he tried for 12 years and failed. And after 12 years, he was only able to recruit his immediate family and friends. So he decided, if I go to Medina, which was the Jewish hub of Arabia, the business hub where the Jews lived, if I go there and preach my religion to them, if they accept me, that will buy me respect and stature between my own people, and they will accept me.
Now, what she said about the Prophet's migration from Mecca to Medina is a bit misleading, because he did not migrate merely because he was seeking converts and respect, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, let's be real. He and his followers faced persecution in Mecca because he preached that there is nothing worthy of worship except Allah. Stones were thrown at him when he preached in Ta'if. His companion Sumayyah was killed by Abu Jahl, and the Quraysh boycotted the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions. The situation in Mecca was so bad for the Prophet and his companions sallallahu alaihi wasallam that they had to migrate to Medina. So this was a key factor in the migration.
So Prophet Muhammad started borrowing a lot from the Old Testament to make his religion more palpable to the Jews, to make it a lot similar. This is why you see a lot of similarities between Judaism and Islam. For example, Jews don't eat pigs, Muslims don't eat pigs. Jews pray a few times a day, Muslims pray a few times a day. Jews fast on Yom Kippur, Muslims fast on Ramadan.
So you think the Prophet ﷺ copied the Qur'an from Jewish scriptures because of the similarities between them? Look, Allah did not just reveal the Qur'an, but according to the Qur'an, He also revealed the Torah, which was given to Moses. So therefore, the Qur'an and the Torah are from the same source, which is Allah. And that's why we find similarities between the Qur'an and the Jewish scriptures. So to say that the Qur'an was copied from the Bible is a non sequitur fallacy. I mean, if two newspapers from two different media organizations narrate the same news story, does that mean one newspaper copied the other? I don't think so. Also, how do you explain the avoidance of contradictions? So why does the Quran not have a single contradiction from the Bible if the Prophet copied it, sallallahu alaihi wasallam?
When they refused to accept him and follow him as the last of the Prophet, that's when he turned against them and started killing them and started expelling them. That's when Islam went from a spiritual movement for the first 12 years of Islam into a political movement cloaked in religion after the year of the Hijrah, after Muhammad went to Medina and the Jews did not accept him. He became a military warrior and declared war on them and started expelling them.
So this is a classical lie about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he was a warlord, that he unalived people because they did not convert to his religion. Well, if that's true, why did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam form the constitution of Medina, where he gave Jews the freedom of religion? He stated that Jews and Muslims should protect and defend each other from external threats. Does this not show that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam desired a peaceful coexistence between Jews and Muslims? That's what he wanted. Now, yes, it's true that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam fought wars, but if you think that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the aggressor, that he was the one who started these wars and that they were ultimately all his fault, then you need to demonstrate that. You need to be specific as to what exactly the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did to start these wars, and you need to give some context behind what exactly he did. This is the level of information that you must provide. Why? Because we have this level of information about his enemies. That's how we know it was they who broke the peace treaty and started the wars. I mean, did they not plan to assassinate the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam by dropping a huge stone from above him when he visited them to seek their assistance in something? Did they not side with the Quraysh of Mecca to attack him? You see, these Islamophobes do not know the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Jews and Christians became dhimmi, or second-class citizens. They were only allowed to stay alive and not be killed only by paying the jizyah or the protection tax. So they had a choice: convert to Islam, or if you want to stay alive, you have to pay the jizyah or protection tax, living as dhimmi in the Islamic nation.
Now she's saying that non-Muslims would be killed if they refuse to pay jizya. So if they neither pay nor convert to Islam, then they are killed under Islamic law. Now this is very misleading. I assume she got this idea from chapter 9 verse 29 of the Qur'an, where it says to fight those who do not believe until they pay the jizya. But this verse is not saying to fight innocent defenseless civilians if they don't want to pay the jizya. This verse is actually about fighting oppressors whose refusal to pay jizya means hostility. Now why do I interpret the verse like that? Because of the context of the chapter. The previous verses are talking about unbelievers in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ who do not observe the terms of the peace treaty and have shown hostility towards the Muslims. Therefore, when we get to verse 29, which says to fight the unbelievers until they pay jizya, is referring to those hostile unbelievers. And their refusal to pay the jizya is hostility. Hence the Quran says fight them until they pay, because paying it would mean that there is no hostility from them. So jizya is the condition for peace settlement in that context. So this is why it's so important to understand the verses in their context, and this is why you cannot infer from this verse that innocent defenseless civilians should be killed if they do not pay jizya. But this is the misunderstanding that Brigitte Gabriel seems to have, and she thinks the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ lived by this interpretation.
Christians and Jews could not ring church bells. Jews could not blow the shofar. Christians could not ring church bells. They could not pray publicly. Christians and Jews could not gather together and build new churches or new temples.
Now, if you're saying that Jews and Christians were restricted from these religious practices in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, then this is a lie. Where in the seerah, where in the biography of the Prophet ﷺ does it say this? Now, I know that restrictions in religious practices come from a statement about the Pact of Umar. So you might say, well, the Umar ibn al-Khattab put religious restrictions on Jews and Christians when he was the Khalifa, when he was the ruler of the Muslims after the Prophet ﷺ. But actually, historians have questioned the authenticity of this Pact of Umar, such as Mark Cohen. And this pact cannot authentically be traced back to Umar ibn al-Khattab. In fact, we know that Umar was tolerant of Christians praying in their churches, because when he came into Jerusalem, he was invited to perform his Muslim prayer in a church, but he refused out of concern that this would mean that Muslims would turn this church into a mosque.
And the way they paid the jizyah or the protection tax was in a monthly ceremony where they would get together downtown, and the Jew would kneel on his knee and hand his goods to the mullah, who would take the goods as the price for buying the protection. And in many areas, Jews and Christians were given necklaces to wear as a receipt that they paid their jizya or their protection tax.
So she says that the non-Muslims paid jizya in monthly ceremonies by kneeling down on their knees and being given necklaces to wear in exchange of the payment that they made. Now, it would be a lie for you to say that this happened at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. You will not find this in his biography. This manner of paying the jizya may have been a later practice in Muslim history, and maybe that's what you meant, but it has no basis in Islam.
Jews considered najis under Islam. Najis is bodily fluid. Najis is garbage. Najis is dogs. Najis is dirty.
Now this is a lie. There is no verse in the Quran saying that Jews are filthy, and there is no hadith saying that Jews are filthy. Now there is a verse in the Quran, chapter 9 verse 28, saying that the polytheists are impure. But the polytheists are not the Jews, okay? They are idol worshippers. And the Quran does not mean that they are physically impure, but that they are spiritually impure because they worship idols along with Allah. They do not worship Allah alone. Now if you think that Jews are filthy according to Islam, why did the Prophet ﷺ buy food from a Jew? Was he not afraid that there would be some filth on that food? And why did he give his armor to a Jew as a way of deferring the payment for the food? Was he not afraid that there would be some filth on the armor when he takes it back from the Jew? And if Islam says Jews are filthy, why did the Prophet ﷺ have a Jewish servant? Was he not concerned that his Jewish servant would pass on his filth? Again, you have lied again and again and again about Islam.
Because Jews were considered najis, if a Muslim man or a Jew walked on the same side of the street, the Jew had to cross the other side so the Muslim man can walk, so he's not dirtied by the filth of the Jew.
I don't know where you got this idea from that Jews must cross to the other side of the street if they're approaching Muslims so that they don't pass on their filth? Now it sounds like you've twisted this hadith, which means that if Muslims are walking towards Jews and Christians on a narrow road, then the Muslims should make them walk near the edge. Now, if you're wondering why the Prophet ﷺ said this, well, he was referring to the Jews of Banu Qurayza, who broke the peace treaty and showed hostility towards the Muslims. Now, this is according to Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah in Zad al-Ma'ad. Hence, the Prophet ﷺ advised his companions to force the Jews and Christians to the edge of the road as a way of not showing them honor in response to their hostility. Also, Al-Qurtubi says in his work Al-Faham Lima Ashkala Min Takhlis Kitabi Muslim that this hadith does not mean that we must compel the Jews and Christians to walk along the edge in a manner that harms them because we are forbidden from harming them.
Islam continued to grow. They went all the way to Jerusalem. They conquered Jerusalem. Christians couldn't ring their church bells in Jerusalem. The Pope in Rome in 1090 told the Christians, how could you sit idly by and allow your brethren to suffer like this in the Holy Land? You need to go liberate the Christians. You need to go help the Christians. That's why the Crusaders were launched. The Crusaders were not launched because they just felt like waking up in the morning and going and converting a bunch of Muslims or beheading them. The Crusaders were launched to liberate Jerusalem.
And then you talk about the Crusaders, a Christian army that took over Jerusalem in the 1090s. And you say that the Crusaders did this to save the Christians in Jerusalem from suffering under Muslim rule. Now, if that's what you think, then why do historians say something different from what you say? So, for example, Dr. Simon John, who is a professor in medieval history at Swansea University, he says that the motive behind the Crusaders taking over Jerusalem was a spiritual motive. He says that they sought spiritual rewards and the remission of their sins through the takeover of Jerusalem. Because remember, Jerusalem is a holy land for Christians, not just Muslims. And why have you not been transparent about the fact that the Crusaders massacred innocent Jews and Muslims in Jerusalem? Was this not a great injustice? What have you got to say about that?
And they were able to liberate Jerusalem for less than 100 years before Salahuddin Al Ayyubi, Saladin, took it back, and Jerusalem remained under Islamic control until 1967, when the State of Israel liberated Jerusalem, where Christians, Jews, and Muslims could pray under the same sky.
Honestly, this is another fib that you have made. So you say that after Salahuddin's takeover of Jerusalem, that the Jews, Christians and Muslims were not able to live together peacefully until Israel's liberation of Jerusalem in 1967. Are you serious? Maybe your fellow Islamophobes can buy that idea, but no sensible person would buy that idea. If you read the book titled The Jews of Islam, written by the historian Bernard Lewis, he talks at length about how Muslims lived a peaceful coexistence during the Ottoman rule throughout the centuries in the second millennium after Salahuddin Al Ayyubi and before Israel's so-called liberation. And if Israel liberated Jerusalem, then why have Palestinian Muslims continued to face harassment from Israelis in Jerusalem? So in summary, this lady has uttered a whole load of false nonsense about Islam and about Islamic history. Clearly, Islamophobes cannot back up their points with anything. May Allah guide her to Islam. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment below, consider subscribing, and please share. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.